Do you love sports? Can't get enough of the highlights, trash talk between friends, and seeing your favorite teams crush the competition? Well, then you're a lot like David Arnett, the founder of Chuck. David, being a huge sports fan, wanted a better way to engage with his buddies, teams, and make sports even more enjoyable for both diehard and casual sports fans. You'll hear how David approached building an app as a non-technical founder, his process for raising capital, and ultimately what the future of sports fandom looks like. So without further ado, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Silicon Alley podcast featuring the David Arnett. Are you interested in growing and scaling your business? Welcome to the Silicon Alley podcast, where you'll hear from entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and top performers on what it truly takes to grow and scale a business. You'll walk away with actionable insights you can apply in your own business and life. Now to William Glass, the CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and your host of the Silicon Alley podcast. David, welcome to the Silicon Alley podcast. Super excited to have you on today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited to sit down. We are in the startup leadership program together and have gotten to know each other really well. And I think one of the things I've really enjoyed is that you've been so open about your own experiences building Chuck and sharing some of the things that have been going well, not going well, and providing such great feedback that I'm really excited to dive in deeper today.
Yeah, no, you and me both. And, obviously we're in pretty similar positions. We're releasing consumer apps around the same time, broad potential, takes a while to get there, and lots of common challenges.
Exactly. And so I definitely want to dive into Chuck, and really excited because it's a fun, I think you're building something that's really fun and is much needed. Big sports guy, obviously in the background, you've got Rangers jerseys, but I actually want to start with your own competitive experience playing chess.
Yeah, so I was a competitive chess player growing up, played my first tournament in first grade when I was 7. And I turned out to be good. So I got a whole bunch of teaching and, had school lessons and private lessons for most of my childhood, and eventually won a couple of national championships.
That's awesome. I did not know that about the national championships.
Yep. I was the third grade and under champion in, I'm going to date myself, but 1985. And then I won the national high school championship in 1995. A lot of close calls in the 10 years in between.
Gotcha. That's awesome. What drew you into chess? I'm just curious. I enjoyed playing chess too when I was younger. I haven't played it in a while, but what drew you to the game?
Yeah, so I'm a problem solver first and foremost. I loved all kinds of games. I loved math as a young kid, and I kind of still do. I just have less time for it. And I still play strategy games here and there with my wife and kids also. It's creative problem solving, right? So it's got that kind of mathematical quantitative component, but it also has an artistic aspect, and nobody's drawing the plans for you. You sort of have to figure out how this is going to come together and envision things that aren't there yet.
Yeah, I love that. Have you ever gone to any of the hustlers in Central Park or Union Square and ever tried to play any games against those guys?
Yeah, so I get that question sometimes. So a fun fact I'll throw in here. So I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Yeah, I'm familiar. Yeah.
So it's about one of my oldest and closest friends, Josh Waitzkin. His dad wrote the book. I am in the book. I am in the movie also, but you would only know that if you read the book. So Josh lived in the Village, and he would go to Washington Square Park all the time, as depicted in the movie. I went with him a couple of times, but no, I did not regularly go down.
Okay. Seems like a good party trick, hey, watch this. Let's go go beat up on the hustlers. But no, that's really cool. And you mentioned creative problem solving, and that's something that you really enjoy, solving puzzles. Can you talk about how chess has played into what you're doing now and your kind of professional career, right? And how you've been able to use those skills?
Absolutely. So one of my favorite things about chess is that it's applicable to almost anything. So just a couple things to throw out there. One, the first thing you need to do, as a competitive chess player, as a strong chess player, is before you even think about what you want to do, you have to think about on a chessboard, what your opponent wants to do. So what else is happening on the board? What would you do if it was their move? So that, I think, is particularly helpful in a competitive environment of any sort. It's also really helpful for negotiations. It's a good life skill for that. And I suppose even for showing up on a podcast from time to time, right? What's the other person going to ask? So it's good for that. It's really good for prioritizing, right? If you're attacking my bishop and I'm attacking your queen, I care less that you're attacking my bishop, right? If three things are on fire at Chuck and one of them is going to impact more users than others, like everyone would get to the conclusion and do the right thing. But at the margins, it's chunked a little bit better because of all the time I've spent on kind of that natural prioritization. Those are just a couple of them.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, being able to focus in when everything's on fire, so to speak, and where do you prioritize? What's going to have the biggest impact on the outcomes that you want to drive, and then also recognizing what is it that your competitor or customer or whoever that other person on the other side of the table is, and what are their goals. So that's really, really interesting. So talk to me a little bit about Chuck. So we've mentioned the name, but can you give a quick overview of what is Chuck?
Yep. So Chuck is a consumer sports app. It is intended to be the social network for sports fans. So the place where there is sports content curated for your favorite teams. And then your friends are there too. So the conversations that you would have in real life about sports, which obviously lots of people do, I certainly do, you can have with your friends in a place where all the context exists, articles about your favorite teams, live scores, and with gamification components that make it engaging to participate and in a friendly way compete for bragging rights with your friends.
I love that. And so where did this idea for Chuck come from? Like, what is it that made you decide to build this?
So it's funny. So the idea actually came from a friend of mine. So I had spent 20 years in B2B market research prior to becoming a startup guy. And I knew I wanted to go kind of back to the beginning and start. And I did not know exactly what I was going to do. The timing was pretty remarkable in that my last day, long planned last day at my old firm was March 31st of 2020. So I came out right into the earliest stages of COVID. So finding the right idea then was a little bit tricky, but I had friends who knew I wanted to start something, and one of them came to me with this idea. So I'll tell you how he came up with the idea.
Perfect.
One of the few positives that came out of that early COVID era is that I used to play a quarterly poker game with friends in Brooklyn, and that became a weekly Zoom-based and app-based poker game early on. And my friend Dave, my co-founder Dave, was just bemused by how much of that conversation during those poker games was dominated by sports talk, both generally, and then particularly, if you remember that in April of 2020, there were no live sports going on. There was nothing. These were all conversations about things that had already happened, and yet the engagement around it was so, voluminous and enthusiastic. Just the light bulb went off in his head that there has to be something here. He didn't have the wherewithal in a number of ways to go deal with it, but he knew that I might be able to, so he brought it to me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So yeah, I mean, how did that insight? So he had this insight. You're sitting around playing poker, talking about sports that aren't going on, things that happened in the past. What was it that was missing though, right? Because there obviously are apps out there, right? Like you've got ESPN's got an app. There's obviously like social channels. You've got like content plays like Barstool Sports. So like, what is it that is really missing from the sports fans experience that Chuck's trying to capture?
Yep. So for I guess I'd call myself in the super fan class. We talk about two types of fans, like a casual fan and a super fan. So I'm not a total maniac, but I'm more in the super fan range, as you can tell by the artwork behind me. And so, for me, it's a life hack as much as anything. Yes, I have all of those channels. I could go to ESPN to get content. I can participate in a text message thread to talk with my friends. I can go to some other place to have some, like when Sporkle has some good sports quizzes, right? I could do all three of those things, but they're in three different places. And then if I want team specific coverage for my team, I have to dig even deeper in all of those places. So it's a time suck And it's, it's not quite as fun and not quite as engaging either, because I'm sort of there for the content and leave. So for me personally, it fills, all of that. I would say for a casual fan, and there are at least as many of those out there as there are, kind of super fans, uh, it's a really handy digest. And to put myself back in Dave's shoes for a second, because he's a sports fan also, but he's definitely in the casual fan category. Conversations that he's in would invariably turn to sports, often at length, and he felt, a little bit out of touch in those conversations. Not all the way out of touch, but like a bit off balance. And even access to just a simple to digest news feed of like, here's the things I care about, almost like the skim or any daily news email you would get, right? So that you could be conversant. There are lots of reasons to read those things, but being conversant is one of them. It's handy for that. And then the gamification baked in is fun. And then the last bit, which I do think is as important as anything here, actually, is when you go to a sporting event, like I went to a Ranger game just a couple of weeks ago. I spent the entire time I was there talking to the 4 people that I went to the game with. I had no conversations, maybe an occasional high five, but I had no conversations with any of the other 19,000 people in the arena. And if you go to a Facebook group or a Reddit team thread, that's really what you're doing. You're talking to the whole arena. And I really I know that's not what I would choose to do if given the choice. And I'm betting my hypothesis is that that's true for most people.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. And yeah, I like how you broke it down by the different groups, right? You've got the super fan, the casual fan, and being in sales, that for whatever reason tends to be one of the conversations that always pops up of like, hey, did you see who won whatever game or whatever that is? And if you don't have that knowledge, like for myself, like I'm not a huge NBA fan, so whenever NBA comes up in a conversation, I'm usually pretty quiet. And so being able to just kind of skim that, I can see how that adds value, especially for someone that isn't as well versed in certain sports in particular.
Yep.
So that makes a lot of sense. So talk to me. So one of the things that we did yesterday during our SLP class was something called Jobs to be Done. And I actually have done an episode with someone who kind of walked through Jobs to be Done in the past. I wasn't super familiar with it, but we went deep last night. And throughout this process of SLP that we've been in, we've been getting feedback, as you said, and you got some really good feedback on the job that you're solving for sports fans. So I'd love if you're open to it, to sharing maybe one of those jobs. And the context for those that may not be familiar with the Jobs to be Done framework is that when you buy a product, you're actually hiring it to do a job, right? So when you get an Uber, you're not buying a ride. What you're doing is you're hiring someone to take you from one place to another. And that's the same thing with a flight, right? You're not buying a flight. You're really hiring someone to take you from one place to another place that's further away that a car couldn't do. So that's the idea behind Jobs to be Done, is that we're actually hiring products to do a job and framing it in that context of, if I were to hire an individual to do this for me. So David, hopefully I've given you enough time to get that if you didn't have it top of mind already. But I would love to know, what is the job to be done that you're solving with Chuck?
Yep, no, right. I did actually prep for that question. See, it's the chess player thing. So I have them sitting up here. I will give you the 3 because I think the context is interesting of the follow-up questions I got. So the first is providing sports fans with curated and current information about their favorite teams. The second is facilitating social connections around sports content. And the third is competing with my friends for bragging rights. So the questions that I got that I liked the most, following up to that, I said facilitating social connections around sports content. I was asked, so you're like competing with a sports bar? And I said, yes, that's right. Right. This is supposed to. One of my investors actually talked about like trying to get the domain sportsbar.com. I didn't mention that last night, but it just occurred to me now. So I was like, yes, that's kind of what the offline version of this would be in some way, at least for that piece of it. And competing with my friends for bragging rights. It's like, oh, so you're like competing with Words with Friends. This is a fun communal distraction. It's relaxing. And I was like, yep, you got it. So that was, the fact that the questions were on point was what made me feel really positive about the feedback.
Yeah, no, I love that, right? Yeah, because it helps you, job speed done helps you figure out what you're competing with, not just from a product that looks similar to yours, but what would someone do without your product altogether? Go to a sports bar to try to be around their favorite team, right? New York City has pretty much a sports bar for every team, for every sport. But as you said, as you mentioned, it's usually with people that are strangers, or you go with a couple folks and then you end up talking to them the whole time versus the rest of the bar anyway. So Chuck provides that place where you can have that same experience in a different format, more accessible and to a wider audience.
Yep, that's the idea.
So talk to me about some of the challenges that you faced building Chuck, right? So for context, do you mind sharing where you are as a company, like roughly what stage you're at, and then some of the challenges that you've had to overcome to get to where you are today?
Yep. So we are launched. We're in the App Store and Google Play. We actually launched last June. So we've been out there for a while. We've got kind of a steady baseline of people who love this for the news feed and for the live scores. Like it really is for me personally, and for others, like the fastest place to get the curated stuff you care about. That's the best part of the story right now. I would say the social part of it is still a work in progress, and the gamification has a couple of really good pieces, and will evolve much more. And it was always going to happen in that order, but from a product perspective, that's where it is. From a business perspective, so we're still pre-seed. We've raised, I think, just over $1 million total now, which is great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That feels amazing as a first-time founder, no matter how long I've been doing other things, right? It's the first time doing this. And so that's come together really nicely. And the big foundation that we've put in place now is that we've brought our engineering and our marketing efforts in-house. So we very intentionally, and I think correctly, when we first set out to build this, decided it was just way too many developer months to try to assemble a team to do it in-house. So we took it out to a firm. They did an amazing job. Is it okay if I give them a plug here?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, and plus, they're based in Boston. They're terrific. And they really delivered. I've worked on lots of projects over the years. I don't think I've worked on anything that stayed as close to timing and budget as this.
That's impressive, because software, especially building a new product, that normally doesn't happen.
Well, and you and I both know that, there are some requirements that are very fleshed out and some requirements that are like, it'd be cool if this did that. and you're leaving a lot to chance and not thinking about things. And, of course, we try to be disciplined about filling those in where they're most important. But the reality is there are only so many hours in a day and plenty of risks. But overall, the build went amazingly. I think if I could go back and change one thing, it would be what we did right after the build. So that would have been the ideal moment to start bringing the engineering in-house, and ideally have a hybrid approach where, take that great firm and their knowledge base and have them, help with the first several iterations and build up that way. I had this, semi-naive vision, to be frank. This will take off like hotcakes. Like, most of us founders think this at some level. And therefore, I will be able, and I had plenty of runway left. But that was very intentional. I left a lot of money in the budget after the launch that we'll just be able to get to our seed round based on this, and then higher based on the seed round. And it didn't come together that way. So, the place we are in our timeline right now could easily have been like September. So that's a lot of, right? That's 6 months. That's a lot of time. And in startup time, thankfully there's enough confidence in this idea and this team and the execution to date where, that isn't life-threatening on any level. Certainly, if I had to point to our biggest mistake so far, that's it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think you're right. Every founder has this vision that, you're going to take off. It's going to be super successful, and you kind of have to, or else why are you founding a company to begin with, right? So there's that little bit of that optimism that plays into it. And so that's interesting, being able to dive in. But what did you do from a selection perspective to end up one, scoping out a project well enough where it stayed pretty much on budget and on time, and then also finding a company to support you? Like, did you talk to a bunch of other folks? Did you already have a connection there? Like, I think that's really interesting for other people that are thinking about hiring someone to help them build a product.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because it's the answer is something that I think not as many people know about as they should. So there's a concierge service by Clutch.co that I'll also throw in a plug for, an enthusiastic plug. So what that branch of the Clutch business does is, basically take, rough project specs from whether it's entrepreneurs or existing businesses, and get bids around them just to talk to the person. I have like a discovery conversation. So it's a free service for the business. It's, I don't know what the bid fee is, but I don't think it's a lot to get to have the introductory conversation, right? So it's a referral and a lead. So I ended up speaking to 7 development firms that way. And I later, because I was so happy with the process and because I needed a marketing agency, used the exact same process for a marketing agency, and spoke to 5 that way. In both cases, I was very intentional in my requirements with them, and which they delivered on, in speaking to a wide variety of firms, geographically, philosophically, all of those things.
That's really cool. I'm not familiar with Clutch, so it sounds like you're able to kind of give the prereqs of like, here's what I'm looking for, and then they allow other companies to bid on it. And ideally, if they've got to pay a bidding fee, then they're probably only going to bid on projects that are a good fit for them. Is that the concept?
Exactly. So I think the intake form included, certainly budget, right, rough budget, which I had a sense of, but the numbers range wildly. My 2 finalists, I'll say, so we ended up using Am Plus in Boston. The second place finisher in that was based in Karachi, Pakistan, and obviously had a lower price point and had a great story. Like, I am confident they would have done a great job. I'm very happy with the decision we made. And Plus was truly an A+ service and team. But I think the other firm would have done a great job too. So yeah, you give them budget, you give them an overview. So like for a mobile app, I told them how many screens I thought they would have. I tried to lay out like what the most complex screen would contain, what the most complex data flow might be, those kinds of things that would at least help someone ballpark it before getting to after conversation with us, a real quote.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It also sounds like it helped you as a founder going in, right? Think through the product in more detail, where you had to think through the flows and the data and everything that you might actually need. Because I know that, when we were looking for Ostrich, I talked to like 30 plus different development firms over like a 6-month period. And the way I got in contact with them was so sporadic and all over the place. And I had different requirements because each time slightly, and then, slowly got better and better. But it wasn't at all a clean process. It wasn't well thought out. It wasn't nearly as, now if I were to do that same process, I would do a lot of what you said, which is literally map out the user flows, the screens, and everything else. But it sounds like that was really helpful in helping frame what you were asking from a development perspective.
It was super helpful, and that's something that I do have from my background. I said I was in market research for a long time. I was a product guy for that whole stretch, and so I've written lots of requirements with data models. I like to say that I'm about as technical as a non-engineer can be, which tends to be helpful for these kinds of circumstances. It can be dangerous at times because I think I know more than I do. Had a couple of those conversations with our new CTO, which are great conversations to have. It's like, why don't you tell me what you want done? I'll tell you how we do it. He said it in the nicest way, and he's totally right. But that's where being a little bit more technical can be advice at times. So I probably had like a 10-page requirements document. I mean, it wasn't crazy. Like if you were going to write a true waterfall requirement stack for my whatever it is 14 screen app, you might have an 80-page document. Like it wasn't anything like that. There was like one picture of here's how a thing might look, and the rest was but it was enough to really get the quote to a reasonably accurate ballpark.
That's awesome. Now, in the timeline of this, when did you raise? Had you raised before you started having the conversations, while you were having the conversations for development? Like, what was that time? What did that timeline look like for you?
Yeah, so it was so it's really been in three phases to get to the number we're at now. So the first was literally back of the napkin. Dave and I actually drew in, was it Mock Plus? We drew like the first mock-up of what the feed looks like today, but we both suck at drawing. Like I'm worse than he is, but we're both bad. And I showed it in my first investor pitch for someone who did eventually invest. And he said, love the idea, never show this picture to anyone again. And I did. I dropped it from the deck. So really it was bullet points back of the napkin for the first wave, and basically got to a critical mass that way to greenlight the development effort. Certainly based on that number, I would not have been well funded to handle the app after it launched, but that was enough to get us to launch. And then one of the first things we did as a natural output of the process with AND Plus is to get a prototype built, right? So, so no data, but a really nice looking prototype, and basically ended up raising the rest of the friends and family around using that. And then just more recently, and I'm actually just wrapping it up, adding on a bridge round that will, we're funded for this full year, but I want to fund us a little bit more responsibly. So just adding a couple, like literally 1 to 2 more slots.
That's awesome. Nice. So that's helpful in terms of timing, because I know sometimes it can be hard if you're listening to this trying to figure out, what happened first in what order, and it makes sense, right? Like you brought on a little bit of money to go do the development, and then you had that prototype, and then you went through it methodically, and it sounds like you've been approaching it in a really smart way and specific way, where it's like, this money will get us to this next phase, this money will get us to the next phase, and just been very smart about how you've been developing the company.
Yeah, let me just share one cautionary tale there, which is, so that second window, I think, is the most important. Like, obviously, the thing has to be funded or it just won't get built. But, do not just budget for, launch day or launch day plus 4 weeks. That will not work out well. Give yourself time. You're going to need iterations. Again, the mistake we made was against how to most effectively execute those iterations, which for sure, I know now, and I feel a little bit dumb for not knowing then that an in-house team should have been involved to supplement that. But we had the time. We just didn't sort of have as much bandwidth as I would have liked, which again we've solved now.
That's awesome. And you've recently, as you said, brought on, you brought tech team in-house, you've got a CTO, you brought on marketing. So what does the next phase of Chuck's life cycle look like? What does that look like? What are you really focused on the next 6, 12, 18 months?
Yeah, so the big picture, maybe the 12-month picture is the one I'll start with out of those three, is, we certainly want to have raised our seed round by then. So to back into, what happens after that, we have grand visions, and I could almost give you a 5-year answer faster than I could give you an 18-month answer. Right? I want Chuck to be a household name. I want, Chuck to be to sports what LinkedIn is to business, but more fun, right? But so to set the seed round as the goal for, the tactical goal for this year, then it's a matter of backing into, well, what needs to happen to support that. In my head, and this is based on a whole bunch of reading from, I'd say NFX in particular, but also some Y Combinator stuff and a bunch of what we've covered in SLP and other miscellany I've read. I've had this target in mind of 1,000 monthly active users, coupled with steady 5 to 10% week over week engagement growth. And whether that engagement growth comes from new users or comes from increased engagement from existing users, I care, but I care a lot less than it just happening at all. I think if we are making the app more engaging, if people are seeing, that this is a better sports conversation than the one that they're already having, like, we're winning.
Yeah.
Or if people are coming here and just sticking around and using it exactly the same, but they're staying, we're winning that way also. Like, this is a game that we can win like 5 different ways, and we really only need one
Yeah.
for the seed round phase. So it's going to be steering into whichever of those works best. So there's, we want to for sure just optimize our chances, make the product as engaging as possible, and also educate and motivate our users to share this with their friends. They will really enjoy it more if they do. Like, I know that, but educating people on features that they, especially if you're someone who doesn't know anyone on the app, you came because you saw a paid social ad or you saw a tweet that looked interesting. So you come in and get it. You don't have any friends when you show up yet, right? Someday that'll change, but right now that's true. You might not even be aware that there are social features. I don't know, you may have some of the same considerations at Ostrich too. So, coming up with the right education strategy to bridge that gap, to motivate someone to share and make them effective sharers, I think that will be a big part of the focus.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, David. And it's, yeah, as you rightly pointed out, it's similar to how we're thinking about it for Ostrich. Is like, if it's a solo, we know that the social experience is better, and that's ultimately where we want to get to. But similar, it's not fully built out. But if we can at least have someone that has a really good solo experience, that would hopefully entice them to bring in more people and social. And so we're thinking about it from like, a solo experience, can that be as great as possible? And then can the social experience add to the greatness of the solo experience, which it sounds like it's pretty similar to how you've been thinking about Chuck as well.
Yeah, like I said, I think in several areas, you and I are in the same boat. So it's great. I gotta say, it's just great to have people to bounce it off of. That's one of my favorite things about SLP is, you don't, in your standard circles, you wouldn't meet that many people who are in the same spot, and we're in a room with 27 others who are in exactly the same spot, and several who have been through it and know what it's like on the other side.
Exactly. And one of the things that, we had a one-on-one call and you walked through, because we were thinking through for us, just trying to figure out how do we track engagement, what does that look like? And you talked about weekly active users, which I think is interesting, but you also have a scoring mechanism that I really like. Do you mind diving into that a little bit of like how you're thinking about engagement? Because there's so many different ways you could slice that, that metric or think about it. So what have you done at Chuck?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So first I'll mention, I think it's a good idea to use some kind of tracking to be able to report this. So we use Adjust. I know there are other solutions out there also. So the things that we track are at a high level. The intent is to track things that will correspond to the eventual monetization potential. Like we're obviously not monetizing our small audience right now, and it will be a while before we even attempt to. And the monetization will be through advertising primarily when the time comes. There are some other things, but think of it for simplicity as primarily an advertising play. So that's going to be about time in app for sure, but it's also going to be about consumption and engagement with things in the app. So something like just refreshing your feed. So we have a news feed like Facebook and Twitter and anything else. If you're coming in, and refreshing your feed twice a day, that's real good. And those are 2 opportunities to serve an ad above the fold, and maybe even more if you scroll. If you go read an article from the feed or go click into the scoreboard, that's probably going to imply a longer term engagement where you're diving deeper, you're investing more time, and that means more for that period of time, because certainly there are opportunities to monetize that engagement, but it also means more. You're likely to come back and do it again. And then if you're participating in a lot of conversations, right, that's something that's going to keep you coming back, and participating in our gamification, answering our daily trivia question. We have a fun site-wide daily trivia question that people can compete against each other. Got some broader ideas there too. But if you're experiencing those gamification components, again, there are opportunities to serve ads, but they're also they're making you more invested in the app.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you're doing, right, is you're also weighting them. So like certain activities have a higher points value. And then based on that points value, that's how you're thinking about like an engagement score, which I think is really smart, because all of those, as you mentioned, are different ways to engage, but the value isn't necessarily equal.
So that's exactly right. It's a great point. I'm glad you mentioned it. And I have that all like parameterized in my little model too. So if I find out that I'm wrong, right, if I find out that the more engaged people are actually refreshing their feed less, but participating in conversations more, which is perfectly plausible, we'll be able to just play with the numbers in that model. You got to be consistent with yourself over time. But you have to say, oh, I was looking at this wrong and this is actually a better map. You'll have opportunities to adjust that over time.
Yeah. No, I love that. And you've got essentially your dashboard was like two metrics. It was the weekly active users and then that engagement score. And like that's how you are measuring the health. And it's super simple to understand where you're at, where you're making progress, and also diagnose what activities, what are leading to higher engagement or lower engagement, depending on what's going on. And you have those metrics, which I really, really like.
I do. I'll add that it also makes for just a kick-ass pitch deck slide. Once the growth curve actually looks the way I want it to.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you'll have that like, oh, look at that up and to the right, and oh, and I can point to, oh, what was this spike or what was this drop, and you're like, well, I can tell you what happened here and here, and
yeah, an investor, I think the right investors for this business will be sports fans on at least some level, but you don't have to be a sports fan. You don't need to understand anything about the business to know that up and to the right is good.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That much pretty much everyone gets, whether they understand investing or how sophisticated they are as an investor. Usually up and to the right is a good sign.
Yep.
I love that. So David, what does success look like, right? I know we talked about what you're focused on over the short term, but when you think about success for yourself with Chuck, with what you want to accomplish as an entrepreneur, like how do you define that?
Sure. So, I mean, the long-term vision for Chuck is about as ambitious as it could be. Like I said, I want this to be a household name. I want it to be a household name globally. There are a couple 100 million sports fans in English-speaking North America, and there are billions of sports fans worldwide, right? Soccer alone, I think the number is something like 3 billion. Added cricket and rugby and lots of other things that are more popular elsewhere than here. The market is just off the charts. And not only are sports popular, but engaging around sports is really popular. Those conversations that we were talking about, that sports bar conversation, happens anywhere in the world. It does happen mostly, but not exclusively between friends. So, I think Chuck could be anywhere and everywhere. And for Chuck specifically, and it would mean a lot to me. Obviously, it would be success for the business. I also think this would be for sure like the fullest potential thing I had ever push over the finish line, probably even more impressive than the national champion thing, which was a while ago now, right? I can only live for so long with my most impressive accomplishment being so there's that on the Chuck side. And then as far as me personally, so I really love and lean into like what we're doing here and SLP. I love this idea of helping founders. I don't know if you remember, but it was in my entrepreneurial journey, when we first all presented those. And whenever I'm done with this, and hopefully this is in many years, and my pockets are nicely lined, I'm well positioned not just to invest in other startups, which for sure I would want to, but also to help guide other founders. Like I like the idea. I don't know if you remember the quote, but there's a line from The West Wing that I love. It's actually about a guy trying to send his daughter to college, where he says, I like that it's hard. It's good that it's hard, but it would be great if it were just a little easier, because in that difference is everything. And I think a lot of founders feel that, and if I could help make that little difference, that would be a very, very satisfying thing for me.
Yeah. I love that. And you're spot on, right? It is not easy being a founder. And I think that's why what you're doing and what you want to give back is so helpful. And even just the conversations that we've had, and I know that we have in group settings, but also in a one-on-one setting, has been really helpful and impactful for me. So you're already doing that in my eyes in terms of having that impact. And I value all of the time that I've been able to spend with you and work through some of these different challenges that we're both going through. So,
well, right back at you, and hopefully much more to come both ways.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, Chuck and Ostrich, household names, finance and sports taking over the world.
I like
it. Well, David, so I like to bring in the personal finance, obviously, with Ostrich. So. And I always like to talk to entrepreneurs because just the context, you have a different context, having, worked in corporate, had that experience, and then now owning this business and having a lot of outflows and all that. But how would you say your relationship with money has changed over time?
So, like over the course of my career,
Well, yeah, I mean, so well, I guess what is your relationship with money today, and that might give context as to how it might have changed over time.
sure. So, my relationship with money today is pretty different than it has been at any other point in time. I have a wife and I have two kids who are 11 and 8, and I am thankfully in a financial position where, to make this business succeed, I'm a net investor in this business, rather than someone drawing a salary from it. So that's a huge benefit to the business, and it is not lost on me, right? A free CEO is a pretty cool thing to have, and I like to think I'm good at it. But even if I'm not, you can't beat the price. Uh,
Exactly.
but I mean, my wife and I sat down and looked at a pretty detailed look at what our expenses are, and does this make sense to do relative to assets and investment income as it exists, and the net answer was yes. There will be a point in time where that ceases to be true if things don't go right. So there, like I said, we're funded through the end of the year right now. I think if we haven't hit those milestones I talked about earlier in the call by the end of the year, it's not that I don't think this can succeed. I very much believe in this idea, but there'll be a real moment of like, if this hasn't succeeded yet, is it the right thing? Or is there something else I might be able to make succeed faster? I don't want to go too far down that path, and hopefully this is only a hypothetical conversation. So that's kind of where we stand now. To trace back to like my first days out of school, I mean, I've always been pretty good. I'm math oriented. Like I get the inflows and outflows, and I'm reasonably responsible. So I was always trying to save a little. I was definitely not doing so at the expense of having less fun. And I'm blessed to have never been put in that position. I think that's a really important thing too. And I would say that theme is probably the common one up until these last 2 years, when I am blatantly, or
Yeah.
not quite 2 years, but year and change, in which I am blatantly, net negative on a cash flow, and accepting it as a long-term investment.
Exactly. No, that makes sense, David. And it sounds like you made a lot of good decisions earlier on in your life and in your career that allowed you to be in the position where you are today, where you can have this opportunity to work on this business that you're really passionate about and not have to worry about drawing a salary in order to keep the roof over the head and food on the table and all that stuff. So I think that's something that's important that we don't always talk about. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs tend to be actually very conservative in a lot of ways early on, that put them in a position where they can take a little bit more risk when they are starting something like Chuck.
Yeah, that's excellent framing, and I would expect no less from somebody who's helping people, hit targets and save against goals and all of that. You're exactly on point.
Awesome. Yeah. So what would you say, David, is the best investment that you've made?
Oh, wow. Other than the time in SLP, because that's starting to rank right up there.
That's awesome. Yeah.
That's
That's a good one. That's ranking up there for me as well. So
yeah. It's been well. Let me actually do a micro version of that. So every conversation, and it's funny. So I had a 20-year market research career, but really that was only into companies, one of which evolved quite a bit over the course of my time there through various transactions and acquisitions and so on. But I have not done a ton of networking historically. So like go meet someone else who might know something interesting. And I haven't done that much job searching over time either. So a lot of the networking that goes on now as a founder is relatively new to me. I have plenty of external conversations, but they were mostly for work purposes. Any conversation that I have with anyone else who has built something from nothing has been a fascinating conversation. I could not recommend those conversations more highly, again, including this one and the offline ones we've had too. Every conversation with a fellow member of our SLP cohort, when I get these emails, there's someone interesting you should talk to. 2 years ago, I might have shrugged and like eventually taken the call. Now it's, how fast can I get this call on my calendar? I know I'm going to get something out of it. And I hope I can give something from it too, whether it's simply something that someone should read or another person someone should meet, or here's a business that sounds a little bit similar to you. Maybe you should go check them out. Those things invariably come out of these conversations, and the value is huge and really can't be replaced in any other format.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a huge and a great thing to highlight. Like the conversations that you wouldn't think necessarily are super high leverage, but really are. How have you made the most of those? Like, what is it when you approach a conversation with another founder, someone that's built something? Like, how do you approach that conversation to make sure that it is valuable for you and the other person?
Yep. So I've gotten really disciplined about prepping questions for the call, or reading LinkedIn bios, understanding a little bit more about what the connection is. If anything, I take great notes during the call. I got to say, I'm hugely aided by the Zoom age and being able to type and listen at the same time across two screens. I don't know if I would be as good at this on pen and paper, and I don't know how soon I'll have to find out. But when I do it, I find like I can't even read some of my notes, and when I type them, they're beautiful. So those are the two biggest things, and then if I see something in my brief read that looks like it might be value I can bring to that person right away, I'll do a deeper dive and, get a link ready, or, ask if they know a certain person, stuff like that.
That's awesome. I like that. Now, David, we don't always make good decisions. So I want to ask you the flip side of the best investment. What's the dumbest money mistake that you've made, or a dumb one that comes to mind? Maybe if it's not the dumbest, but one that comes to mind that you're like, I don't know why I did that.
Well, so the dumbest dates way back, but it's kind of funny. So I had some stock shares for my bar mitzvah, not crazy amounts, but I had some, and some of them were invested in Sun Microsystems, which I think is now whatever it is now part of Oracle. But there was a moment right around before the dot-com bust, where I think I had like $3,000 in it, and it went up like to a solid six-figure number. And I did not diversify my portfolio when that happened, and I should have. So that's certainly from a numbers perspective, the worst number, because it came right back down to that $3,000.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yep. That's that's a
Oops.
tough one. Yep. Well, at least you weren't buying in at the six-figure number and anticipating it going to a seven-figure number and then dropping down.
No, and people did. But like I said, to go back, it's good that it's hard, right? It's supposed to be hard. It wasn't the best thing that I had made that amount of paper money doing nothing at that age. No hard feelings about it disappearing in time. Thankfully, I have not needed it yet.
That's good. That's good.
But still, oops.
Yep. Oops. Well, awesome, David. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you sitting down. I want to leave you with the last word. So if there's anything that you want to share, if there's any asks that you have of the audience, somebody that's listening and maybe could help support Chuck, and then how folks can connect with you outside of this podcast.
Yeah. So this has been great. Thanks for having me. Certainly, if any of you are sports fans out there, the thing is live, right? Chuck is live on Google.
Download it.
Go download it. You'll see, the work of our brand new engineering team. The app is, going to be running faster than ever before, and we'll be adding new features weekly. Where it's been kind of monthly since launch. So that'll make a big difference. We also, whether you're a sports fan or not, we definitely want to hear from you. We want more VOC. We want to conduct some customer interviews. So if you're, even tangentially interested in sports or in app development or in startups, and just want to have a chat, just like I said earlier, I'd rather err on the side of having too many conversations right now than too few. As for reaching us, so you can email me directly, david.arnett@chuck-sports.com. You can find our website at heychuck.com, and you can follow us on Twitter @ChuckSportsApp. Those are probably the best places to find us.
Perfect. And I'll link to all that in the show notes as well to make it easier for anyone that is multitasking right now and not able to jot that down.
You got to take notes as you listen, people.
Exactly.
That's the best thing you can do for yourself.
Yep. Those notes are key. So,
but I guess if you're on a Peloton, I get it.
Yeah, if you're on a Peloton, yeah, that's tough. Or if you happen to be listening to this and you're on the subway or something, well, yeah, you should be able to do that on the train.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what Chuck does and what all you guys accomplish. And I'm just grateful for you sitting down and taking the time today.
Well, thanks, and right back at you with ostrich. I think it'll be a lot of fun watching those lines go up and to the right.
Exactly. I'm excited.
Cool. All right. Thanks, William.
On your way out, please share the podcast with others. It's the only way that the community grows and others hear these incredible stories from entrepreneurs and top performers. And of course, pound that subscribe button so you get notified when episodes drop every Friday. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley Podcast. Have a very profitable day.
You got no time to waste, but still you hesitate. Caught in a circle saying, I'll never leave this place. Some words got you searching for the bright side of